Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the November 16th Budget Deliberation Meeting of Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their territory upon which we gather with gratitude. The first item I have tonight for Council is the approval of the agenda of November 16th. Are there any errors or omissions? Moved by Councillor Salter, seconded by Councillor Beale. All those in favor? Thank you. That is approved. The first item on the agenda this evening is a budget variance report. Mr. Butterworth, would you please give us the background on this issue for 2017 budget variance report?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I have a PowerPoint presentation for Council, and the recommendation at the end will be to receive the report. Anyways, we're doing this today as opposed to on Monday because most of the directors from City Hall will be away on Monday, so if there are any questions, this was a more appropriate meeting to have it at so that they could answer questions. So the purpose of this presentation is to inform Council and the public of how City is progressing with our operating and capital revenues and expenditures against the 2017 amended budget. And the information to be presented is the summarized departmental revenues and expenditures for 2017. Most of this information has been provided in the agenda package, along with a more detailed breakdown of the departmental revenues and expenditures. So what we'll be going over today is the General Revenue Fund. We'll review the major revenues, review departmental operating expenditures, review of capital expenditures. We'll have a quick look at the water and sewer funds, AWS, ERWS, PCTC, and how we're doing with our DCC collections. So we'll get into the revenues. So this is just a little table I put together that shows the revenues. What you see is the main one missing is our property taxes, because when I put that on there, it skews. They're around 13 million, and it scales this so far up that you can't really see the other one. So I didn't put it on this chart, but we'll get to that one next. So the green lines on there is our budget amounts, and the blue lines are the actual. So you can see at this point, just by looking at this, that our actual revenues for most part are exceeding what our budget amounts are. One exception being the gas tax grant, where we're at 50%, but we should be getting our other half of the gas tax grant in November. And what else? Everything else at this point is at near budget or over budget. So the other revenues are looking good. And these are just the numerical, including the property taxes of that last chart. So the property taxes are a little below budget right at this point in time because we're still, the Fortis 3% fee we get is not paid until March, and I have to do an accrual at year end for it for this year, so that isn't in there yet, and that's why we're a little bit below on our property taxes. Property tax penalties are a little under as well, but our second penalty is applied at the end of September, and it went in October in our ledger, so it's not showing on here, and that's another 16,000. Interest income, as you can see, is way over budget. Part of that is due to our high reserves with our capital projects are behind schedule, so we've got all that cash is actually. All the costs are actually in cash right now, waiting to pay for those projects. And interest allocations to our reserve funds is also done at the end of the year, so that will knock that down a little bit. We will be over budget on that yet by the end of the year, though. And building permit revenues are very high. It's been a near record year for development. And this is also why the planning and engineering fees revenues are high as well, and at this point exceeding our budget amounts. On to our departmental expenditures. Again, just another little graph showing our actuals are the blue and the budget's the green, and we're at this point with 3/4 of the year done. The actuals should be around 3/4 of the green and not above that. If they're above that, that could mean trouble. And you can see the RCMP is one that's well below. We haven't got the third quarter invoice yet. I actually just got it on my desk today, so it's not included in these numbers. So when we add that
Mr. Butterworth, does the RCMP fiscal year have a thing to do with that? Because their fiscal year ends in March 31st, 2018.
No, what has to do with it is they're very slow at billing. So we just got the September bill today on my desk. So that's a month and a half after the end of the period. So. Yeah, so their fiscal year does make a difference, but it doesn't make a difference to this because the January to March is their last fiscal year, but that's our current fiscal year, and that's included in this cost. So here's the numeric of the last schedule, and I'll just go through a few items on here on some of the different departments and where they're at. Overall, if you look at it, percentage of budget remaining, everything looks good. Within some of these, there are a few accounts that are going over budget or are over budget, but they're more than offset by other areas that are under budget. But just to inform council of some of the little areas that are over budget, in council and admin, this is comprised of admin, HR, IT, communications, bylaw, safety, and council. Council special projects, Canada's 150th birthday budget is $32,500. And the totem pole project that we're working on is tapping into that money, and I anticipate by the end of the year that'll be $10,000 to $15,000 over that budget amount. The admin legal is 115% of budget, and bylaw legal fees are $16,800 over budget. HR hiring costs and HR consulting are both over the annual budget at this time. These are offset by savings in other areas of the HR budget, such as salaries, legal, and conferences, which are well under budget.
Mr. Salter?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, but we haven't hired. We actually have IFTE that we haven't hired yet. Isn't that correct?
That's
correct. Would that
correct.
not affect our salaries?
That's correct, and that's why the HR salaries are well under budget.
Right.
So they're offsetting the hiring costs that are over budget, and the consulting that's over budget as well. Long-term debt, second half debt payments are still to be made, and also the interest rate decreased on one of the loans, but the 2017 budget was not adjusted, so we've got a little bit too much budget monies in there based on the revised interest rate. RCMP third quarter billing, as I mentioned, isn't received yet. We also received a credit of $179,000 relating to the 2016 policing costs where they overbilled us. This happens every year where they send us the bills, and when they do their reconciliation, which is after their year end, which is in March, then they send us a credit, or in one year we actually had to pay more, but every other year I've been here we've got a credit. So that was $179,000. I also just got on the bill I got today, I see there's a retro RCMP wage increase, and that's a $72,000 hit, so that's going to offset some of the $179,000. Fire department, volunteer indemnities and annual hydrant maintenance are charged in December, so there's no cost showing for these so far this year. That's why one of the reasons why they're so far under budget. And salaries are also under budget in the fire department, as the new maintenance staff budgeted for 2017 hasn't been hired yet. Building inspections and community development or planning, the planning wages are well below budget due to several vacancies in the department, or vacancies that have now been filled but were filled later in the year, but the budget was for the whole year. Parks, the community park maintenance is at 99% of budget, and this is offset by other parks being under budget, such as the community park sports field and Springwood Park and highway streetscape. And And Public Works, overall, it's well below budget. Several areas are over budget, though. Road maintenance budget is at 96% spent at the end of September, and snow removal is at 112% of budget. And again, as I said, these are offset by other areas that are under budget, such as open and enclosed drainage, which are well below budget. In minor capital, as you can see, there's still 77% of the budget left. Costs for 2017 include asset management strategy, 10 parks projects, which are 36% complete, 4 PCC projects, which are partially complete, 9 PCTC projects, which have a little spent so far, and a number of other miscellaneous projects in various stages of completion.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, I just have a question. We approved $100,000 last year for Mr. Figuera for doing when you're out and about doing your roads and pipes and so on. And so is that reflected, like where is that reflected in the budget, that $100,000?
Works adjacent to development is in the capital. There's also a little bit in the minor capital, but there's also a component in the capital. So there's some of it in minor capital and some of it's in capital. A larger project over 50,000 would be in capital. We're actually going to see that, what happened with that in the water fund when we get to it, because there are some costs in that in the water fund, but there is very little spent in that in the general fund.
So just so I'm clear, so that $100,000 was for our engineer, when he was out in the community, if something needed to be done and he didn't want to come back to council, he actually had those dollars that he could use to fix,
That's what we're going to see with the water. When I get to the water fund, you'll see where that came into play.
Okay, so
but
you
in the general
have
fund,
a breakdown.
very little has been spent in that area.
Yeah, because what I'd like is a breakdown of how that was spent. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, on to capital expenditures. Administration capital is primarily for land acquisition and bylaw vehicle, HR management software, and computer upgrades. Land acquisition and the bylaw vehicle are complete. The land acquisition is actually $291,000 below what we had in our budget. So that's primarily what some of the budget remaining it reflects. Fire department, their main purchase is for a new ladder truck. That's what the equipment is, and a new pickup. The pickup's been replaced and the ladder truck contract's been awarded. The fire department training ground is for a training tower. The contract's recently been awarded for this. And the park's largest budgets for land acquisition relating to Ermineskin, Raft River Trail Development, Jensen Greenway, and water park replacement are the largest projects in there. So the land acquisition is complete, and erosion control in the community park, it's not one of the largest projects that I mentioned, but it's complete. Raft River Trail seems to be on hold due to challenges with the bridge placement or securing bridge land, and the water park's expected to be completed before the next tourist season. In Public Works, the largest Public Works and Engineering capital projects include Corfield Street and the new Public Works shop building. 88% of the costs to date showing there are for the new shop building. Corfield and several other projects are in the design stage or recently awarded, with work due to start on the Corfield job soon. That's it for the general fund. I'm going to move on to the water fund. If there's any, does council have any questions at this point, or we're good? Let's move on then. So in the water fund, the water billings are pretty much on target with our budget. Operating expenditures are low at this time. We have general fund admin charges and AWS, ERWS charges, which are recorded at year-end. Minor capital is also has a large amount of budget remaining. The costs relate to the water meter reading equipment, flushing maps, and water model updates. Amortization showing on there is recorded at year end, so at year end I'll have a number in there. And long-term debt payments are less than budget because we haven't borrowed yet, actually used any borrowing for the water treatment plant, which the interest for that was in here, and we haven't incurred any interest on that yet. And we have another debt payment to make at the end of the year as well. And the capital, 99.7% of the capital spent this year relates to ERWS capital works, which are underway. Permitting delays have put the project behind schedule and also waiting for grants. So we will not spend the full $17 million this year. Again, most of that relates to ERWS. Other larger projects include Corfield Street and McKinnon Street and a new well, which to date have very little spent on them. As I mentioned, works adjacent to development is over budget, and that relates to work done at Hearst and Cheney Street, which is near the new Kingsley Manor, I believe. It's in that location or near that area where they had to do some work on the water. I'm not exactly sure what was done. One thing about this is when the costs exceed $50,000, it becomes a capital project. The capital budget has $60,000 in it. This budget has $40,000. So I will be looking at exactly what these costs are, and they may be moved into the capital, in which case I'll actually be under budget by a few thousand. But I need to investigate exactly what these costs are first, and so they may end up being moved out of here and moved into a capital project. When they started the job, I don't think you always know what the costs are going to end up being for these things, and this one was coded to operating, but it appears like it may be a capital job. So. So that's it for the water. And in the capital, there is, as I said, $60,000 for works adjacent development. It's in that capital number that's showing there, and nothing's been spent on that yet this year. In the sewer fund, again, we're on budget for our revenues. We're very close to our budget. The operating expenditures are well below budget. The collection system maintenance has not been required as of the end of September. Minor capital is for right-of-way easements and works adjacent to development. And little, as you can see, only $1,000 has been required for that so far this year. Amortizations recorded at year end. And the capital budget relates to 6 different projects. Corfield Street and Wallace Street are in the design stage, and the other 3 projects have not yet started. Aerosmith Water Service, under budget at this point in time. ERWS capital projects are well under budget, but they are underway, and again, as I said before, they're a little behind schedule due to waiting for some grant awards and some regulatory approvals. Last one, PCTC, this building, it's under budget at the end of September, and the DCC collections are actually on budget at the end of September, but I'm a little concerned where we're going to be at the end of the year because they haven't increased, they've only increased $15,000 to this point in time from the end of September, so I'm not sure if we'll achieve the budget amount by the end of the year. That's it.
Any questions from members of council? Because the recommendation is to receive for information. Mr. Butterworth, what's the overall? I'm not looking for the outstanding amount. You've given that, but are there any carryovers because of budget surpluses? Are there going to be any or is it too early to tell that?
It's too early to tell where we're going to be with our budget compared to actual at the end of the year, but I will will make a estimate that we will be under budget. I'll make a prediction we'll be under budget.
We'll be under budget?
That's my
Thank
prediction.
you. When are we going to have that information, do you know? I won't hold you. A couple of months?
I have over 100 adjustments I have to do at year end to get to that number, and it takes some time, so I will not really have a good number till February sometime. I can probably do an estimate before then, a rough estimate, but as I said, with 100 adjustments, there's a lot of numbers that get moved around as part of our year-end process, so it makes it a bit challenging to give you a number right now.
We'll look forward to that. So if there's no other questions from any members of council, I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder that the report be received for information. Moved by Councillor Beale, seconded by Councillor Powell. All those in favor? Thank you. That's carried. Thank you. I thought I had it. Mrs. Lovegrove, could you please provide us with your presentation regarding the 2018 to 2022 draft provisional financial plan?
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to look at the changes that have been made to the budget since the October 30th presentation here to Council. So to start off, we'll look at the General Revenue Fund. We'll look at the changes from the October 30th presentation. We'll take a look at the 2018 to 2022 Financial Plan Budget Bylaw, and we will look at the accumulated surplus. The Water Utility Fund and the Sewer Utility Fund did not have any changes from the last meeting, but we will just take a review of the Financial Plan Budget Bylaw and accumulated surplus figures for both of those for Council's refresher. So to start off with the General Fund, we approved some budget adjustments at that meeting. On the expenditure side, curb painting in $10,000, that's ongoing for every year. A security system upgrade at PCTC in 2018 was $50,000. Bus benches and shelters for buses. In 2018, we would purchase the benches and shelters for $50,000. Also, the garbage containers in 2018 for another $2,000. And then there would be an annual maintenance cost of $8,000 going on into the future. We approved a daytime security guard for this building at $40,000 per year. We approved a Canada Day grant increase of $7,500 per year. We approved an increase for the Parksville memorabilia for $6,000 a year. We added a capital amount in 2019 for a pickleball facility of $200,000. We approved a grant and aid for title treasures in the amount of $3,000 annually. And we also added collective bargaining in 2018 and 2022. This was admittedly supposed to be in the budget, and we realized it wasn't in the budget, but because we are doing collective bargaining in those years, we have put that in the budget at this time. On the revenue side, Mr. Butterworth brought forward a fire services agreement on November 6th to Council, and the changes from what was in the budget to the agreement, there's $98,000 more in the agreement, so we have adjusted the agreement for the years 2019 to the years 2021 for an additional $32,800 from the previous presentation I gave you. There was one item that was to be discussed a little bit further. It is included in the figures that I am going to be showing you, but it has been brought back forward for you to discuss and to determine if it still remains in the budget, and that is the museum grant and aid of $5,000 annually.
Okay. We're going to stop here and discuss it. For the benefit of members of council, the museum board of directors is in the audience this evening, so if there's any questions to be asked by any members of the board, feel free to do so. And before we start, how are we going to start this? Who wants to speak first? Councillor Powell? You go right ahead.
Thank you, Worship. Just for clarification, I see that we have the recommendation further on the agenda. Do we wait for that point to discuss the motion, or do we discuss it now?
I would, Mrs. Comas?
If council wishes to discuss it, pardon me, now, you can bring it forward and deal with it now. Otherwise, it would be dealt with when you arrived at the agenda with it.
What's council's pleasure? I'd personally like to discuss it now. Councillor Powell.
Yeah, can I make a motion to move it forward into this discussion?
I have a seconder for that, seconded by Councillor Burton. All those in favor? Okay, so let's proceed. Councillor Powell, do you want to go first?
I will. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your financials that you provided to City Council. I see that you have an amount of $614,766 in an investment account. And so my question is, why are you looking for funding?
I guess that question is directed to the chairman of the board. Do you want to answer that question? Who wants to answer that question? Okay, go ahead. Microphone, please. Your name, turn it on. There's a button there. Yeah.
My name is Margaret Banks. I'm the treasurer for the Parksville and District Historical Society. I've been the treasurer for almost a full year now. The $614,000 that we have invested...
Point of order. Could you shut out that light, please?
I don't think there's any recording to be done in this council chamber, so please turn it off. Thank you. Put it away. All right, go ahead.
The $614,000 that we have invested presently is the remainder of the bequest left to us from Mrs. Craig. We estimate, having gone through the financials for the last number of years, the museum is losing roughly $75,000 on average every year. We have not been able to make any improvements to the infrastructure at the museum. Our grounds at this point in time need some work. The Englishman River building needs some work, and our historical buildings also need preservation work. We estimate that if we continue to lose the amount of money that we are losing on a yearly basis, the money that we have in our investment may last us 4 years, and that's without making any of the improvements that we need to. So basically that money is being used for operating expenses, and we hope in this coming year to be able to make some necessary improvements to the grounds and facilities.
Go ahead, follow.
Thank you, Worship. And I see that you've got fixed assets, and that there has been some work done on buildings and repairs. And the question I have, you had 2 paid staff?
Yes?
And you're basically their wages over
Yes?
budget every year?
Yes?
And so the question I have is, knowing that, why wasn't that budgeted for? Like, we met with the museum just over 3 years ago, and they were in the same predicament that they are today. And they, at that time, they had $600,000 in the bank. And now I see you've got $614,000. And so, for one, what would $5,000, how would that make a difference? And 2, why aren't you using your own money instead of coming to the city to ask for money?
Well, we would like to use our money to improve the museum and not to pay staff wages.
One more follow-up. And then we'll
So
move on.
maybe what you need to do is look at, I hear that you're going to be doing a restructuring.
We are hopefully planning on doing that, yes.
And so during the restructuring, I can assume, or pardon me, I won't assume, I would hope that there would be changes to how you're paying and what your priorities are, because right now I don't know that they are the best for the museum. Could you tell me how much it cost you for your new computer program?
It cost us roughly $5,000.
For the program itself?
Are you talking about our network?
Yeah.
Yes, and we did get a grant for that from
Okay.
the Regional District of Nenano.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, but I can't support providing any money in a grant to the museum because of the fact that you've got over $600,000 in the bank.
Any further questions or comments from members of council? Because I'm going to eventually turn this over to Councillor Salter, who is the council liaison. Any other questions? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for being in the hot seat. Now, this is what we consider a grant in aid. So do you have a specific purpose that you plan to allocate the $5,000 if given to?
At this point in time, we don't, because this is catching us at a crossroads. We have our annual general meeting coming up this coming Saturday, which means we will have a change in our board. We did not want to make, the current board did not want to make definite decisions in this period of time because we have new people coming on board.
Thank you.
Any further questions from members of council? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to turn this over to the council liaison, Councillor Salter.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think I'd like to hear a little more clarification regarding what changes the museum is making in order to work towards their sustainability, because I know that there's been some significant changes. And I think council needs to hear this.
Would you please introduce yourself and welcome. Welcome to the hot seat.
Thank you. David Haynes, president of the museum. We have made a variety of changes in the museum and are continuing to make a variety of changes in the museum. We have, for instance, a farmers market, which, with your pleasure, we will have again next year. However, in this last year, we actually had one of our employees running it. In the future, what we're doing, we found that was excessive in costs to us. So what we're doing in the future is we're actually, pardon the pun, farming out the farmers market. And what we're doing is contracting it out to one of our people that we know that we like very much, Connie Kuramoto, who runs the Urban Farm School at the museum. We probably will be changing the date to a Sunday. Instead, we've got recommendations from farmers, so we should be able to get our farmers market back on a good ground again, because this year was not a shining success for us at the farmers market. Other things that we're doing, we have the Urban Farm School, which offers one-off classes. We have the Gaia College, which is actually certified by the Canadian Organic Gardeners Association, Growers Association, and their curriculum is run through that. It's a very high level. It's when I took the course, and when I took it, I found it equivalent to the master's degree that I got in education. It's a very high level of training. So it's a very good course, and it's recognized clear across Canada. So that's one of the courses that we offer as well, and we have 9 courses within Gaia College that we offer. We also offered Here We Grow. We were a signer onto the grant process, as was the city, as was Qualicum as well. So we have had classes there on that, and we will be continuing to have classes with Here We Grow there. Other things that we've done, we tried to do the garagiste, the thing that nobody here could say, which was great fun for us. But anyway, unfortunately, the garagiste people themselves actually pulled out from the thing because they couldn't themselves get it organized properly, but we would like to try again for next year. It would be nice to have similar sorts of things. What I would like as soon-to-be past president is to have events happening there at least every 2 weeks. Interesting events, good-sized ones that would attract crowds and would make this a destination.
Councillor Salter?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So it's my understanding that the $600,000 that you have now, what I believe I've heard is that you don't want to spend it all now because you are using those dollars for maintaining the buildings and have had to dip into it to maintain some of the buildings even up until now.
Actually, the last 4 years have been really, I could summarize it as maintenance years. We had the McMillan House, when it was originally moved there, was chinked. That is, the area between the logs was chinked with concrete, not with lime plaster and horsehair, as it should have been. And as a side, not benefit, but a debt from it, the concrete slightly dropped from the log and actually worked as a gutter and brought water into the logs between the logs. And so we had to remove all that concrete and replace it, and we had to get a person in who actually knew how to do it. I don't know how to do everything. We have the schoolhouse originally was actually the engineer's shed for the E&N Railway, and that shed was donated to the Craig family, which then turned it over and turned it into a school. It was built at a time when people were saving money, and so they built all the rafters out of 2x4s and instead of adequate sized lumber, and they put it on 32-inch centers instead of 16-inch centers. When I got there, it had a beautiful Japanese look to it because the roof came down and sloped out like this. Beautiful look to it. But climbing up inside there, we could see with one snowfall it was going to implode. So we had to do a lot of restoration inside, and that was quite costly for us. Sidewalks were not in. We had to put sidewalks in. We've had a lot of expenses and a lot of maintenance that we've done at the museum.
And so it's also my understanding that you're using money from interest on that, interest dollars from your savings, and you've used that as well for your maintenance. Is that correct?
Actually, we've had to dip into it mostly for employees this year. We had a problem. We had thought that we were having, the students were coming in that we employed. We thought they were coming in for a 12-week stint. It turned out that they were actually for 9 weeks, that somehow the agreement had changed, and we covered off 3 of those weeks, so that cost us considerably.
Okay. And so I think I understand that you may not be utilizing staff
We don't honestly know. That's the point. We need to restructure. At this point, what we've done is we've done the statistics on. We actually did very hard analysis of what was going on in the last while. And so we've done a lot of data collection on how many people we had come through the museum, how many people were repeats, that sort of a thing. We wound up with much higher numbers than we had 5 years ago, which was 0.3 people per hour. We're up to 1.4. To be honest, it's abysmal. We have to stop. We have to change. We have to have 5, 10, 15 people an hour coming through the museum to make it worthwhile. We need to have staff on hand, but we can't afford that kind of a thing. When we break it down to dollars and cents, 1.4 people actually works out to about $7.50 per hour that we're making. But for an employee, we're losing about $8 or $10, and it just doesn't make economical sense. We need to stop and rethink how to do things.
So you're going to be utilizing volunteers and other helpers?
Definitely, lots of volunteers, yes.
So it seems to me, from as far as I can see, I mean, I certainly know that this council has supported, many requests that have come forward that don't provide really what the museum does provide to this community, which is they're extremely involved in engaging our community, the blacksmith shop, all of the artifacts that are there, Gaia College, I mean, the market. you are holding our archives for us, our local history, and you're even, I know, looking at current people who will become our historical figures in the future, and you're even looking at managing to collect information now for future generations. So there is no other service in our community that is collecting this data for us.
Correct. Actually, we're wrestling with the names of it, but basically, who are you? Right now, each of you are a part of Parksville's history. Parksville's history did not stop with the Leffler family and with various people of that nature. What we're looking at is 50 years from now, 100 years from now, it would be wonderful if we had a small time capsule of each of your families so that we knew who you were, so we don't have to go and dig up all this information by research. You'll actually have provided it. It might be a little skewed. It'll make you look better, though. So
I guess what I want to say is, with the money that they have, as long as I've sat on council, what I've heard is this conundrum that the museum can't seem to step out of, which is you've got $600,000, spend it. But then when they go to spend it, you've been spending your money. What are you doing with your money? So it seems to be you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And I don't find that to be quite fair or equitable, because you've got something that you're running here really without the help of the city, and without really the help even from the community, except for our membership. So it is a hard service for you to manage on your own. And so certainly, for me, I think $5,000 is the minimal amount that the city should be assisting with. Most communities assist the museums. So I would like to make a motion here.
For that, Councillor Burton has raised his hand. So, Councillor Burton.
As you know, I was a longtime supporter of the museum, and I think I was the secretary of the board at the time of the receipt of the bequest from the Craig family. A couple of quick questions. I noticed your farmers market dropped significantly in its revenue stream last year. How do you account for that?
We had an employee who ran it for us, and I think the only way I can say is the chemistry was not quite right for her as a manager of the market. That's why we've looked at contracting it out to other people. So that was something that was quite a gut wrencher for me, because I was, of course, the person who started the farmers market at our museum. We have to have faith in our employees, and we do have faith in our employees. So we gave them latitude to run it, and just didn't pan out.
Now, you talked about the Gaia College, and I don't see a revenue stream on your financials. Is there one?
Gaia College pays us rent.
Okay.
That's pure and simple, and it actually comes from the Canadian Organic Growers Association.
Okay.
That's $800 for the course.
So now the last question, what would you have done differently if you didn't have the support of the bequest from Mary and Craig?
I think we'd be into brownie sales. I don't know, to be honest with you. We certainly couldn't have employees. We would never have been able to consider them. The maintenance would have been terrifically hard. Please temper anything I say with, we are extremely happy to have the museum, and the people that put it together did a beautiful job for it, but there are some times where we had to do maintenance, and some pretty big maintenance. One of the post offices was listing at 15 degrees. We had to correct that we had a lot of things that, without it, I don't know how we would have survived. I don't think we could have, to be honest.
Okay. Can I let Councillor Beal go ahead?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for being here tonight to answer questions. I certainly do agree that a museum is a very important part of a community, not only for many reasons. And I know personally I've been very excited to see the programs that have been developed over the recent years, and I know that it's offered great opportunity and increased opportunity for citizens and for visitors to see the blacksmith shop, for instance, and the markets and so on. I do understand that the museum is situated on city land. Is that correct? And it is in fact park area, so people are free to visit the grounds at no cost, understanding they may make a donation, and there is an admission to go into the museum. And the museum looks after the grounds and looks after the water and all of that. Is that correct?
Yes, although we are taxed for the water.
Right.
Yeah.
And so for that reason alone, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for something from the city, given that the city is not having to look after these park grounds and look after the garden areas and so on. So I really appreciate the presence of the museum. I appreciate that that you've got some real work ahead of you, and with that money that is available to you, I really hope that you'll be able to develop some especially exciting programs and involve more kids from the schools and all of those sorts of things. My understanding, I realize that the motion hasn't been brought forward, but my understanding is that there is going to be an amendment to the motion that was presented.
There will be, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would just like to say that I haven't heard anything tonight that would change my mind. I'm sorry, I can't agree to give you $5,000 when you have $614,000 in the bank.
Before I go back to Councillor Salter, I think it's fair to say that this upcoming year is a watershed year. You've had three consecutive large deficits, and you're projecting a smaller deficit of $10,000, which is considerable. And you've taken what I consider to be drastic action in terms of ridding yourselves of paid employees so that you can keep your head above water.
It's been operating. It's like operating with our arms tied behind our backs. Yes, it is awkward. By the way, the blacksmith shop, we are taking students fairly soon, and we will be offering courses there as well. So we are working at various ways to make money.
Okay, unless members of council have any more questions or comments, I'm going to turn it over to you for a motion, Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one more thing that you didn't mention was with regard to the market, that the museum won't be running the market and paying to have it ran, but someone will be paying the museum.
We're getting rent, yes. We're getting rent to run the museum. So it actually costs us nothing, and it gives us a large crowd.
Revenue, yeah.
We will be opening, if we are open, we will be opening the museum for people to come and visit, again, as we do for free during the market.
Perfect. So I just wanted to bring that to council's attention. So yes. So I would like to make a motion regarding that a one-time grant to the Parksville Museum in the amount of $5,000 be included in the 2018 budget, and that receipt of the grant funding be contingent upon the Parksville Museum appearing as a delegation to council in the fall of 2018 to report on the current financial situation, progress on building a sustainable operating model, and future financial projections. I'd like to see a consideration then.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Councillor Beal. Discussion.
I'd like to see a consideration at that time of looking at this as a budget, as a line item at that time.
Councillor Burton.
So Does that mean that we're not going to cut a check until they appear before us to show us why what the funding has been spent, is proposed to be spent on, or what is the? Okay.
It's, Your Worship, my understanding of it is that we would provide the funding, but it's a condition of the funding that they have to come back and provide us. That if we provide them with the funding, they're agreeing to come back and provide us with that information.
Okay. Any further questions? I have a mover and a seconder. I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay. We're going to move on.
Thank you.
Mrs. Lovegrove, would you please come back to the microphone and continue on the 2018-2022 Provisional Financial Plan?
Thank you, Your Worship. So moving on, these figures reflect the financial plan draft budget bylaw. As I said earlier, the $5,000 annually for the museum is included, so if it is now a one-time, there will be slight adjustments on these figures to be brought forward for the budget bylaw. But the first page is basically the operating items, the revenues, and the expenditures, showing the net income or loss for the all of 5 years. In this case, it's net income on the operating side. The second page basically shows the non-operating budget items, which are capital expenditures, payments on long-term debt, and the other items that you see there. So at the end of the 5 years, we do either have a surplus or a deficit, and those surplus or deficits go in and out of our accumulated surplus so that we have a balanced budget. So based on that 5 years, the projected accumulated surplus items are as follows. So at the end of 2018, we project a surplus of $3.5 million, 3.9 at the end of 2019, 4.3 at the end of 2020, 3.3 at the end of 2021, and 2.5 at the end of 2022. And that matches nicely with our 5-year plan. The following 5 years is for your information only. It does show that our reserves start to go down, and they stay down for the last 4 of those 5 years. But at this time, it is still a little early to make any adjustments to the budget for this, but we will be monitoring the budget on a regular basis on year by year case so that we will have a balanced budget and in the black as we go forward. That is it for the general fund. So are there any questions at this time?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to get input from council at this point in time on the projected general fund and restricted surplus at the end of the year, or the overall, of the overall provisional financial plan. So does anybody have any questions or comments? Councillor Salter.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 2. And one, actually, I think it might be to Mr. Butterworth. I'm not sure. It was regarding the $79,000 that the RCMP had put forward this year, but we hadn't expected. I'm assuming that was for staff.
You can answer that, Mr. Butterworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, I've just asked for more information from that, from the RCMP, but their contract had expired, I believe it was 3 years ago, and I believe this is the retroactive payment to catch up on the RCMP members' contracts. The province pays that out, and they just gave me one little number on their invoice, and so now I've asked for some information just to back that up, but I believe that's what it's for.
Thank you for that. And so it is my understanding that we have approved, though, a staff increase for the RCMP in 2018. Is that correct? Did we?
You're talking about adding one more member? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yes, currently in the budget before council, there is one additional member starting April 1st in the budget.
Right. Okay. And then my second question, that was 2, but it was related.
One more.
So this unrelated question was, and so when you're doing this when you're looking, from, for instance, 2018 now into 2027, I know it's a stretch, but are you including population increases over that time? Do you know what % of population you're using for your numbers, approximately?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Salter, the population varies. We base it on two models. One is the StatsCan, based on our census for over the last few years, and also on the VHA health model for the area for the next 20 years.
Councillor Bird.
So related to Councillor Salter's last question, I know we've talked about allowance for future development. What number do you use? What's the process of gauging the tax increase from properties that will be developed going forward?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Burden, it's a complicated model. We do have, based on population, based on estimated build out, based on the number of housing starts that we have, the number of housing starts we projected. We've got all that factored in. Based on that, then we try to determine what the average increase in assessment per single family dwelling, per commercial building, per institutional building. And we've got all that factored into the model. And then we say to the model, you've got all that. How many housing starts do we need? What is our anticipated population? What is the inflation for the year? What are any increases for any specifics? And then we build that into the revenues and the expenditures that we have going out over 20 years. So it's all our best guess based on averages at this time, and that's all we can do.
The other answer to that is that's why we do a budget a thorough budget every year. Okay, any further questions from council before I go to the audience? Okay, audience, does anyone have any comments or suggestions or questions on this particular item? Come to the microphone, please, your name and your address, please. And turn on the microphone. Turn on the microphone, please. Okay.
Paul Reitsma, 410 Harnish, Parksville, V9P2H5. I've got a number of questions, and a couple of them are triggered right now. When I looked at the 2023 proposed general surplus revenue, the surplus is, I think, about $800,000 for 2023, and then it becomes minus, $2 million and what have you. Is there a calculation in there in terms of tax increase, or is it based on the zero tax increase, or?
Mr. Butterworth, Mrs. Lovegrove. Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship. There is tax increases based in the model. Right now, the first 5 years are 4%. Then I believe we go down to 3.5% for 2 years, then 3% after that.
Okay, thank you. And incidentally, I applaud council for the 4%. It is
I ask that
realistic.
question every year.
Secondly, in terms of population increase, we all know that once we reach 15,000, particularly the RCMP cost will, I think, go up to, 87%, whatever. And looking at the fire chief, once we have 15,000, we're going to be needing some paid firefighters, which, according to the Vancouver information I got, you're looking at $80,000 to $90,000 per firefighter, inclusive of all the costs. Might I ask, through the chair, when is there a reasonable expectation for the 15,000 population?
Thank you, Your Worship. The model shows the 15,000 is in about year 2030. At that time, we have built in an increase for RCMP costs as well as a tax increase to cover those RCMP costs. The fire department has started increasing their staff once every 3 years, with one this year, one next year, and then one staff member every 3 years after that. So we are planning on that as well.
My model says sooner than 2030, but it's only my own model.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Mayor, I don't know what your pleasure is, but I have about 4 or 5 questions, and they might, flow into other deliberations. Would you permit me to ask them now? Then I've got them off my chest. What have you? For when Mr. Butfield was mentioning the income, to trigger the question, and it's really for my benefit, I suppose, we have deferred property taxes. I think people at 60, 65 can defer the property taxes. When does the city see those funds?
Mr. Butterworth?
Yes, Your Worship. We get those funds starting actually near the end of July, August, September. We just got some this month, so usually by the end of the year we have almost all of them in, but we don't get them by July 4th or July 2nd when taxes are normally due, but we do get them within the next few months after that.
But when people defer their taxes because they're 60 or 65, they deduct the homeowners grant and the old age grant, etc., but they don't pay any taxes. There's no revenue coming either to the province or
the government pays us the money.
Oh, the government pays.
It's a loan with the government. They have a loan with the government.
Thank you. Some general questions, and they're mundane this time. I must warn you in advance. Is there a? I'm talking about the very successful and very used promenade, the boardwalk. Is there a contingency fund or plan to replace? I think it was about $700,000-800,000, and it's starting to need some maintenance. Let's put it that way. I might have missed it, but is that in the budget?
I think Mr. Figueroa can answer that better than I can, but I know that there's a plan for renovation and improvements to the walkway, which is included. Is it in this year's budget? I think it is.
If I may, Your Worship, we build maintenance money into the budget for the boardwalk on an ongoing basis, so it's in there.
Well, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Maintenance is one thing. Replacement, of course, is another thing. They don't last forever, although they might have been either creosoted or whatever. They're starting to deteriorate. And is there a mechanism in place whereby we consult with the senior governments to have that replaced, because at some time it's going to have to be replaced?
Mr. Figueroa, I think it's going to be a case of renovation and infrastructure replacement and renewal.
Yeah, at the moment it's a maintenance issue. We have a number of planks there that rot over time that we replace. That's what's in the budget at the moment.
Okay. The other one is more of a promotional thing. As you might know, many years ago, there was a promotion of Parksville Fund of $25,000. We had that for a couple of years. Is there such a fund or possibility in this budget, or has Council considered doing such a fund to put monies aside for extraordinary things that the money is there and then it doesn't have to go to be approved by Council?
On a number of occasions, we use council contingency for people that come. For example, last year, VIU came with this major Canada-wide university program. 600 people, I think, were staying at Tanamera, so we gave them some funding for that.
Comes out of contingency.
And I think there's a skate program coming. Where's Mrs. Tardif? There's a skate program coming later on this month. Skate. National program, provincial program? No? No.
Okay, thank you. 2 or 3 more. Is there a mechanism in place to periodically undertake a comparison with similarly populated municipalities as to the overall, in terms of population, staffing, non-union, union, yearly growth, development permits, and by law enforcement cost and details like that? Is that being done every so many years?
Yes, and one of the other things that we've started doing this year, We did it a few months ago. We looked at we started with our first year of 2015, reviewing all of the recommendations that have been made either by staff or by council, and right up until October, I believe, of this year. So that's in vogue now, and that will continue. It's sort of an up-to-date of what's lagging behind and why, what's coming up, and what's been completed, and how has that gone.
Okay, so that's done periodically, yeah. Under the DCCs collected, is there a requirement by the city to do extra street sweeping at construction sites? The reason I mention it is that I'm not the only one, particularly when you look at Wren's Road, and it's been going on for a couple of years. My windshield got busted because of, and it's $500 deductible, and I know I'm not the only one. Is that under either the development permit or is it under DCC's rules and regulations that the developer has to do some street sweeping, particularly during the weekends?
That's negotiated before the awarding of the contract in terms of the responsibility of the developer and the contractor. And I know that I had a question on Wren's Road a number of weeks ago, and we were able to confirm in writing to the people that were questioning it that we did have an agreement on how they were going to operate, and that agreement is being respected as far as we know.
I know you were there, sir, because I happened to I was at the ladies' home last year and again a couple of weeks ago, and mirrors fell because of the continuous blasting. Furthermore, the high-pitching noise of the drilling for the blasting, which goes on constantly, who monitors that? Does the city monitor that in terms of excess noise?
I know that existing homeowners that are on the site have been asked to contact a contractor if something has been damaged. The contractor, as far as I know, the contractor has been going to each individual owner, making a list of what's been happening, and then they'll deal with that at the end of the contract when all of the construction is completed. I know that one particular couple that contacted me, their driveway has been ruptured by the blasting, and they were told that would be looked after the project was completed.
Yeah, that's a good point, because the seismic, the waves from the constant blasting, I've talked to people, they feel that particularly their concrete slab on which the house sits, of course, there's a grave concern, as well as driveways, actually. Is that something, so the city doesn't monitor that necessarily?
Mr. Figueroa?
If I may, Your Worship, in terms of how the development is carried out there, we do, as a city staff, we do press the developer to ensure that they're aware of the issues that the public is facing, and we put it certainly to their professionals, and make sure that they are following up with the residents. In that particular case, we did consult with them and ensure that they were doing seismic monitoring and making sure that the vibrations were within industry tolerance. So we do make sure that they do what they're supposed to be doing, that they're following up. It is their site, it is their responsibility to ensure that they're not damaging properties. And if any damages occur, then of course they would be required to settle up with the homeowners. And so as a city, as staff, we stay in enough contact with that project to ensure that they are making the appropriate contacts with the public.
Including the noises as well, because sometimes, with the drilling for the blasting, they're very high-pitched. That, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much, is it. Again, I applaud council for the 4% and for so many years. And I can't pass this one by. On November 26th, the CFC is our concert. Light Christmas music, and every 4 or 5 years the Tuesday choir has a full rendition of Handel's Messiah with a full orchestra, and guess what? December the 3rd. So you're hoping you come out to Knox United Church.
I'm going to ask you to stop now, because there's a great big lineup behind you wanting to speak.
Thank you very much.
Well, I only wish Okay, thank you, Mr. Reichman. Okay, Mrs. Lovegrove, would you please carry on? And we're doing water. We're into water and sewer now.
Thank you, Your Worship. Going with the water fund, as I said, there were no changes from the October 30th presentation. So the draft budget bylaw that's in front of you remains the same. And again, it shows the operating net income or loss for the 5 years. In this case, again, it's all an income. And then it shows the non-operating items, the capital, the principal payments, reserves, transfers, and again, the transfers in and out of the accumulated surplus in order to provide us with a balanced budget. Once those transfers in and out are done, our water fund is looking pretty good right now. We're projecting a surplus of $3 million at the end of 2018, $3.8 million at the end of 2019, 4.9 at the end of 2020, 5.2 at the end of 2021, and 5.9 at the end of 2022. And as you will notice, the following 5 years are still pretty healthy. At this time, we still do not have full factual figures in the budget for the operations of the new water treatment plant, which could, in the next couple of years, adjust these figures downward slightly based on the operating thing when it gets up and running. So that's it for the water fund.
Questions from council on the water fund? Councillor Burton.
The loan payments on the water treatment facility are factored into this.
That's correct.
And what are we using for interest rates going forward into the unknown future? Have we got it locked in?
Thank you, Your Worship, through to Councillor Burton. We're using the figures from the Municipal Finance Association. We use their amortization schedules, and I believe it's at 4.75 at the time that this model was done.
And is that locked in over the duration of the loan, or is it do we have to renew? Is there a variable in there?
At this point, we don't have any rates locked in with them because we haven't started borrowing yet. We'll initially be borrowing on a temporary basis before we lock it in. Once we know the total amount of the debt, then we'll lock it in. It's the timing isn't the greatest because interest rates are going up, and if we could have locked in with our loan last year, we would have had a killer rate. I think the rate we end up getting will be slightly higher, but I can't remember if that's what the rate is in the model, but it still may be in the neighborhood of under 5%, I'm sure, by the time we do lock in.
Further questions from members of council? Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just on that note, I'm wondering, I understand that we don't need the money right now, but could we still not start that process and lock in at the lower rate now, or at least have that lower rate approved? Is that a possibility without having to utilize the dollars?
Until we need the funds, which actually I am going to be in the process here in this month to get some money from them, but again, it'll be on a temporary basis. The next borrowing is in the spring. We could do whatever we borrowed up to then, lock in the spring borrowing, whatever the rate is at that point in time, or we wait till the end of the project and do it. So if we have borrowed enough, or $3 million, say, just to use a number, in the spring, then we may decide that before interest rates go up any higher, we'll lock in that portion. Then the following year, we'll lock in another portion and have two different borrowings.
Any comments from the audience with regard to the water fund? Okay, let's move on to the sewer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. So in the sewer fund, once again, there was no changes from the October 30th presentation. So the financial plan budget bylaw that is before you was the same as presented at that night. Again, you will see the first 5 years operating net incomes and losses, and then the non-operating items with the flows in and out of the accumulated surplus, giving us a balanced budget. So accumulated surplus for the water fund, sewer fund is projected at 2.5 for 2018, 2.5 for 2019, 2.6 million for 2020, 2.4 million in 2021, and just over $2 million in 2022. And then the following 5 years are slightly lower, but still very healthy as far as the sewer surpluses are concerned. And that's it for the sewer fund.
Any questions from members of council regarding the sewer fund? Councillor Burden.
When's the expansion of the French Creek treatment plant scheduled for?
That's a ways off, and if I'm not mistaken, I think that DCCs are going to, from a regional district standpoint, is going to look after most of those costs. Mr. Butterworth, you want to comment on that, or Mr. Figuera, or both?
Yeah, it's my understanding that, first of all, they've been increasing our requisition fairly heftily every year to build up a war chest, I guess, for lack of another term, to help fund that. And also they've been collecting DCCs to help fund that, and they will be borrowing for that, I think it's my understanding as well. So between those three sources, I'm not expecting any additional funding from the city when they, I believe it's also underway or starting, but I'm not sure. But
any further questions or comments from members of council? Seeing none, any further comments or questions on the sewer fund from members of the audience? Okay. I need to do some, just one item here before I get to the main motion of tonight's meeting. We did receive, council received email correspondence from one resident providing comment on the budget. And I need a mover and a seconder to receive the correspondence, the email correspondence from Mr. Bill Rathall, dated November the 11th, 2017, providing comment on the draft provisional financial plan be received. Moved by Councillor Salter, seconded by Councillor Beal. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. All right, council, we're coming to the point in the meeting where I need a mover and a seconder for the following two recommendations, which I believe I can take all at once, that the 2018-22 Provisional Financial Plan, as presented at the November 16th Council meeting, be approved, and that staff be directed to prepare the appropriate bylaw for Council's consideration. You want to move it? Turn the mic on. Yeah, okay. I heard you, but nobody.
Sorry. I wanted to re-explore the 1.5 full-time equivalents for the Ermineskin Park.
Okay.
Is that before we make this motion, or during, or
Let's
after?
do it. Let's do it before.
Okay.
If it will
Mrs.
change
Comas?
the budget, then we need to do it before.
Okay. It pertains to the budget. So I spent a lot of time in the Ermineskin Park prior to the city purchasing it, in the area above the railway tracks that had the covenant agreement on it. It has developed trails, it has a garbage can, it has some very crude benches, and is being maintained. And I guess my question is, why are we hiring 1.5 people at 40 hours a week for 52 weeks of the year to maintain something that is being maintained? And if there's to be further maintenance on the undeveloped portion, then shouldn't we wait until we have a plan for what that looks like prior to committing to that staff increase?
My understanding, I'm going to ask Mrs. Comas to answer, but my understanding is it's not being maintained. I could be wrong. So, Mrs. Comas?
Not regularly. So basically we do have, and the area that you referred to, we go in once in a while, empty the garbage can probably a couple times a year, but do very little in there. And we have done no work at all on the 56 acres. That is the area that we haven't acquired. We are waiting for an assessment from SCM Risk Management Services to define what we face in terms of liability. And there are immediate concerns about trees that need modification or removal in order to make the area safe for the public. Our staff were able to walk it just last week. Our tree hazard inspector, as well as our foreman of parks, and there are unapproved bridge structures in the area that we have recently acquired that have to come out. There's debris from dumping along much of the perimeter that is adjacent to the subdivision area along Lodgepole, which has also resulted in an increase in bylaw calls about the dumping. Before we owned it, nobody complained about the dumping. Now that we own it, people are complaining about the dumping. In essence, it's the staff perspective that the best security and warning system for a park of this size is to encourage use by regular citizens. The more traffic we have in there, the less enticing it becomes for camps. We've already had one camp in there that we've had to remove. So the establishment of permanent walking trails is a high priority for that area, just from a security perspective, because people are going in there regardless. Now, it's not just Ermineskin. Ermineskin is sort of what I refer to as the tipping point in terms of our park acquisitions in recent years. We have acquired in the last few years, we've got 1.5 acres of park and trails at Eagle View, Sunray Stairs, 700 meters of walkway at Cedar Ridge, plus over 2 acres of park in the same area. And we are bringing on side the Jensen Greenway, and we are starting work on the Raft Harbor Trail. All of these, combined with the need for the work we have to do in the Ermineskin Park, is going to be an awful lot of staff hours. Our service levels are not being maintained to the public satisfaction. We get complaints about park maintenance and trail maintenance every year. And so in order to be able to address those issues and to do the work that we need to do in Ermineskin, we believe 1.5 FTE positions are warranted. Now, the intent with that, basically what Council's approving is the equivalent hours for 1.5 FTE at a laborer rate. So if we can take that 1.5 FTE hours and use them to increase the hours of our annual returning seasonals to full-time, then we can take that 1.5 and make it 3 full-time positions. And then we can improve our level of service and response to all our parks. And that was the intent behind that. We are slated to begin in the spring the Parks and Open Trails master plan process, of which Ermineskin will be a large part of that. But it's estimated that we have about probably 4 kilometers worth of trail that we could prepare in that 56 acres, which, to maintain it in a way that the public can use it, is going to take a lot more resources than what we have. You know, we have, one of the advantages of Ermineskin is that it is a lot flatter than a lot of our other parks. Flatter. I haven't, but I've been told by our staff that there are flat areas that would be conducive to providing accessibility options for people who are mobility challenged to be able to use that particular area. It's what I've been told, particularly with trail development and putting in a flat base and making it accessible. So for those reasons, that's why we're coming forward and asking you for that.
Follow up?
Thank you. I have a better understanding, and it would have been nice if we'd seen more of that with regard to the larger requirement, rather than just put it under the Ermineskin when it was initially brought to us. The bridge you speak of is, I got to have it out of there in 10 minutes. But it's a beautiful piece of land. There is a significant hill in the middle of it where you have a fantastic view out over Lasqueti Island. I don't know about a lot of flat areas that'll be accessible, but who knows? You can do wonders with wood. I'll withdraw what I was about to do, so thank you.
Okay, Council, I'm going to read two recommendations for which I'm going to need a mover and a seconder. First of all, the first recommendation is that the 2000... I'm sorry. Yes.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had one question with regard to Ermiscan. It was my understanding, though, that that the city wanted to keep Ermiscan as natural as we could, rather than turning it into, like a community park. That we were just going to keep it natural. So is that not? I mean, if we're adding now trails throughout, I'm not sure how.
Well, there are already trails there.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of bringing them to a standard that don't cause us liability. And in terms of what we call natural parks, still require maintenance and still require, because if we leave everything unchecked, then everything will grow over. So we still have to make sure that the pathways and things are maintained, and that if there are any noxious weeds or things in there, that we remove those and
follow up.
Just a quick follow up, just so that and so I think that was something that Councillor Burden had asked was, it's already that's all, the condition that it's in, it is in now, with trails, occurred prior to the city going in. So, so therein lies the question. If they're there, how was that?
Well, we didn't own them. We weren't responsible for them then. But once we own them now. And so once we are responsible for them, we take on the liability of those trails.
So was it the Ermiscan band that was doing that?
Yeah,
okay.
It was. If there were issues, they were liable. We weren't. If there are issues now, we're liable.
Councillor Burton.
We were responsible for the covenanted part.
Only for the covenanted part, yes.
Okay, so here we go. And I'm going to need a mover and a seconder for both these recommendations, but I'll read them first. That the 2018-22 Provisional Financial Plan is presented at the November 16th, 2017 Council meeting be approved, and the staff be directed to prepare the appropriate bylaw for Council's consideration. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Salter, second by Councillor Beale. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. And the last item on the agenda is I need a mover and a seconder for adjournment. Do I have a mover? Councillor Beale, seconded by Councillor Salter. We are adjourned. Thank you. Oh my God. It's not even 8 o'clock. I felt like it was like 9 o'clock.